To my son, she said, her voice breaking. This song is yours now. Finish it. Hello, everyone. Let's dive into today's story together. The room hummed with anticipation, the soft clinking of glasses blending with murmurs as the dimly lit lounge pulsed to the rhythm of a jazzy melody. At the center of it all stood Nicholas, a slender young man with tousled brown hair and a quiet intensity that drew the crowd's attention as if the room itself breathed in time with him. His fingers caressed the piano keys with delicate precision, building a haunting melody that seemed to echo from another world. The final note lingered in the air, a ghostly whisper of raw emotion before dissolving into a wave of applause. Nicholas rose, his eyes scanning the crowd without truly seeing them. Their cheers felt distant, a backdrop to the emotions churning inside him. This performance was not just an escape, it was a window into his soul. Music had always been his anchor, a way to navigate the storm of his life. But tonight, as he stepped off the stage, a strange heaviness pressed against his chest. There was pride in his performance, yes, but also a gnawing ache, a feeling that his triumphs carried shadows of loss. Outside the lounge, the evening air was crisp and alive with the scent of rain-soaked streets. Nicholas pulled his jacket tighter around him and walked quickly, the rhythm of his footsteps matching the beat of his thoughts. His destination was clear, the small, cozy apartment he shared with Eleanor, his grandmother. Eleanor, a beacon of resilience, had always been the pillar of his life. After a prolonged battle with illness, she had finally been discharged from the hospital earlier that day. When Nicholas arrived home, she was sitting by the window, the glow of a lamp softening her weathered features. Her silver hair framed a face marked by both time and kindness. She smiled as he entered, but her eyes carried the weight of untold stories. "You were amazing tonight," Eleanor said, her voice warm but tired. "Thank you, Gran," Nicholas replied, setting his bag down. "How are you feeling?" "Alive," she said with a faint chuckle, patting the worn leather armrest of her chair. "And grateful. Speaking of gratitude," she paused, her expression turning serious. From the small table beside her, she picked up a tattered leather-bound journal and held it out to him. Nicholas hesitated. "What's this?" Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she extended the journal further. "It belonged to your mother. I've kept it all these years, waiting for the right moment. You deserve to know the truth now." The air in the room thickened. Nicholas stared at the journal as if it were a living thing, holding secrets too heavy to bear. Slowly, he reached out and took it, his fingers brushing against the worn leather. Eleanor watched him with a mixture of pride and sorrow, as though she were both unveiling a gift and unburdening herself of a great weight. Don't forget to like if you find this story meaningful to you, and subscribe so you don't miss the next stories. Journal, Eleanor began softly, holds the story of your parents, their love, their dreams, and the sacrifices they made, your mother especially. She gave up everything to protect you. Nicholas's heart tightened as he opened the journal, the faint scent of aged paper rising to meet him. The pages were filled with his mother's handwriting, elegant and flowing, yet infused with an urgency that seemed to leap off the page. The words painted a vivid picture of his parents' love story, their shared passion for music, and the dreams they once held dear. But as Nicholas read further, the story darkened. His father, Andre, had left them, not out of indifference, but to shield them from dangers that his choices had brought into their lives. It was a decision that tore their family apart, leaving scars that time could never fully heal. Eleanor's voice broke the silence. "Your mother never stopped loving him, you know, but she had to be strong for you." Nicholas closed the journal, his mind swirling with questions and emotions he couldn't yet name. "Gran," he began, his voice cracking, "why tell me this now?" "Because," Eleanor said, leaning forward with a fierce determination in her eyes, "you've grown into the man she always hoped you'd be. It's time for you to understand where you come from and to decide what you'll do with it." Nicholas's gaze fell to the journal in his lap. One phrase kept resurfacing in his mind, written in bold strokes on one of the pages: "Music is where we find each other again." His thoughts turned to the song he had performed earlier at the lounge, a melody that had always come to him naturally, as if it were embedded in his very being. The realization hit him like a wave. This was his mother's song. He had been carrying a piece of her all along, without even knowing it. "She wrote about that song," he said aloud, more to himself than to Eleanor. "She did," Eleanor confirmed, her voice trembling. "It was unfinished when she passed, but she always believed it was meant for you to complete." Nicholas felt a surge of both inspiration and trepidation. He was suddenly aware of the immense legacy he carried, a legacy of love, sacrifice, and the unbroken thread of music that bound his family together. His mother's journal was not just a relic of the past, it was a guide to the future. "Gran," he said, his voice steadying, "I need to do something with this, with her story, her song." Eleanor's eyes sparkled with pride. "Then do it, Nicholas. Pour your heart into every note. Let the world hear her voice through you." As the night deepened, Nicholas sat by the window with the journal open before him, the city lights stretching out like a constellation of possibilities. His fingers hovered over the piano keys, hesitant but eager, as he began to hum the melody of his mother's unfinished song. It was a tune of loss and longing, but also of hope, a song that spoke of second chances and the enduring power of love. Nicholas woke the next morning with the faint light of dawn creeping through his window, casting soft golden hues across the journal on his desk. Sleep had evaded him, his mind turning over the revelations from the previous night like waves crashing endlessly against the shore. The melody of his mother's unfinished song echoed in his head, a haunting refrain that tugged at something deep within his soul. It was as if the notes themselves whispered, "Find me, complete me." He traced his fingers over the journal's worn cover, feeling the weight of its history. It was more than a book. It was a bridge to a mother he barely remembered, and a father whose absence loomed like a shadow over his life. As a child, he had often asked about Andre, his questions met with Eleanor's measured silence or vague reassurances. Now, the truths contained in those pages had cracked open a door Nicholas wasn't sure he was ready to walk through. Yet the music called to him. The morning passed in a haze, and by early afternoon, Nicholas found himself at the lounge, his sanctuary. The familiar scent of aged wood and faint traces of bourbon filled the air, grounding him in the present. Jack, the lounge owner, greeted him with a warm smile. "You're here early," Jack noted, wiping down the counter. "What's on your mind, kid?" Nicholas hesitated. Jack had always been like an uncle to him, a steady presence who offered guidance when life felt unmoored. But the words he wanted to say felt tangled, heavy. "I need your advice," Nicholas said finally, sliding onto a bar stool. Jack raised an eyebrow. "This sounds serious." Nicholas placed the journal on the counter, its presence almost reverent. "It's about my mom. And my music." As Nicholas recounted the previous night's revelations, Jack listened intently, his expression shifting from curiosity to solemn understanding. When Nicholas finished, Jack leaned back, his gaze thoughtful. "That's a hell of a legacy, Nicholas," Jack said. "But it sounds like it's not just hers anymore. It's yours too." Nicholas nodded slowly, his chest tightening with a mix of fear and resolve. "I want to honor her, Jack. I need to finish what she started." Jack's face broke into a grin, Then I think I know just the thing. He reached for a flyer pinned to the wall behind the bar. The Chicago Youth Music Festival. It's a big deal. Lots of talent scouts, lots of opportunities. If you want people to hear your mom's song, this is the place to do it. Nicholas took the flyer, the bold letters seeming to pulse with possibility, but doubt crept in, its voice sharp and insistent. What if I'm not good enough? What if I fail? Jack seemed to sense his hesitation. Look, kid, the hardest part of chasing a dream is taking the first step. But if anyone can do this, it's you. And you won't be doing it alone. The word spread quickly. The lounge regulars rallied around Nicholas, their enthusiasm infectious. Jack promised to help with logistics, and Roberta, the lounge's manager, offered her own support with a smile. Even Eleanor, despite her frailty, brimmed with pride when Nicholas shared his decision. "I've waited so long for you to find your purpose," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Your mother would be so proud." But as preparations began, another presence re-entered Nicholas's life, one he wasn't sure he was ready to face: Andre. The man who had been a ghost in his memories now stood before him, flesh and blood, his eyes reflecting years of regret. "I heard about the festival," Andre said awkwardly, his hands shoved deep into his coat pockets. "I want to help." Nicholas stared at him, 1,000 emotions surging like a storm. Anger, confusion, longing, all tangled together in a knot that refused to unravel. "You want to help now?" Nicholas said, his voice tight. "After all this time?" Andre flinched, his shoulders sagging under the weight of Nicholas's words. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness," he said quietly, "but I want to try. For you, for your mother." The silence between them stretched, thick and suffocating. Eleanor's voice echoed in Nicholas's mind. "Pour your heart into every note." He wasn't sure what his heart felt for Andre, but he knew one thing. This festival wasn't just about his mother's song anymore. It was about confronting the pieces of himself he had long tried to ignore. 2 days before the festival, as Nicholas rehearsed late into the night, a man entered the lounge, his presence unexpected but commanding. Daniel. His sharp features and calm demeanor hinted at a history Nicholas couldn't yet place, but his words carried an undeniable weight. "Your mother would have been so proud of you," Daniel said, his voice tinged with a melancholy that seemed too personal to be casual. Nicholas set down his sheet music. "You knew her?" Daniel nodded, pulling a dusty cassette from his pocket. "Your mother recorded an album before she passed. It was never released. Circumstances made sure of that, but this," he held out the cassette. "This song was meant for you." Nicholas took the cassette with trembling hands, the weight of it both literal and metaphorical. "Why are you giving this to me now?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Because it's time," Daniel said simply. "Your mother always believed in you, even when the world didn't. This is your chance to carry her voice forward." That night, Nicholas played the cassette in the quiet solitude of his room. His mother's voice filled the space, ethereal and haunting. The song was raw, unfinished, but it carried a power that made his chest ache. It was a story of love and loss, of sacrifice and hope. And as he listened, Nicholas felt a shift within himself, a spark of something greater than fear or doubt. The festival was no longer just a performance, it was a calling. As the day approached, Nicholas threw himself into rehearsals with a determination that bordered on obsession. His fingers danced across the piano keys, his voice rising and falling with the melody, each note a tribute to his mother's legacy. Eleanor, though frail, remained by his side, her encouragement a steady anchor. "You've already won in my eyes," she told him one evening. her smile radiant despite the lines of exhaustion etched into her face. "No matter what happens, your mother's song is alive because of you." In the quiet moments before sleep, Nicholas often found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. His mother's journal, Andre's return, Daniel's revelation, all threads weaving together into a tapestry he was only beginning to understand. And yet, for all the pain and uncertainty, there was hope. A fragile but undeniable hope that this performance could be the start of something new. The night before the festival, Nicholas stood at the piano, his hands hovering over the keys. The melody filled his mind, accompanied by the echoes of his mother's voice and the memories of her words. Music is where we find each other again. And as he began to play, Nicholas knew with unwavering certainty that he was ready to face the stage, ready to honor his mother, ready to let the music speak for itself. The day of the Chicago Youth Music Festival arrived like a silent storm, the weight of its importance pressing down on Nicholas from the moment he woke. The morning light seemed too bright, its golden rays painting his modest apartment in hues that felt unreal, like a dream teetering between hope and dread. Eleanor, seated at the breakfast table with her frail hands wrapped around a cup of tea, watched Nicholas intently. "You're ready," she said, her voice a soft melody of reassurance. "You've been ready for this for longer than you know." Nicholas nodded, the knot in his chest tightening. "I hope so," he murmured, glancing at the leather-bound journal that sat on the table like an unspoken promise. The cassette Daniel had given him lay beside it, a fragile relic of his mother's unfinished dreams. "Hope?" Eleanor tilted her head, her eyes twinkling despite the fatigue that lined her face. "No, Nicholas, you have more than hope. You have her song, her spirit, and you have you." Her words stayed with him as he gathered his things and prepared for the festival. The leather-bound journal slipped into his bag, a talisman of sorts, its weight grounding him. As he stepped out of the apartment, the city greeted him with its chaotic symphony, honking cars, bustling pedestrians, and the occasional street performer adding their own notes to the cacophony. But none of it could drown out the steady rhythm of the melody in his mind. At the festival venue, the atmosphere buzzed with electric anticipation. Performers, clad in a kaleidoscope of outfits, hurried through the hallways, their faces a mix of determination and nervous energy. Nicholas, clutching his sheet music and a tape recorder with the cassette snugly inside, felt the walls closing in around him. "Breathe," Jack said, appearing at his side. The older man's presence was as steadying as a lighthouse in a storm. "You've got this, kid." Nicholas exhaled slowly, nodding. "I'm trying." "You're not just trying," Jack countered, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. "You're doing, and don't forget, you've got an army behind you." Jack wasn't wrong. Nicholas's support system had grown in ways he hadn't anticipated. Eleanor was there, seated near the front row in a wheelchair, her presence a beacon of love and pride. Roberta and the lounge regulars had come, cheering him on with an enthusiasm that made the venue feel almost like home. Even Andre was there, standing awkwardly near the back of the hall, his eyes filled with a mixture of regret and hope. But the most unexpected presence was Daniel. He stood quietly by the stage, his expression inscrutable. As Nicholas approached, Daniel reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "This just arrived this morning," he said, handing it over. "It's from someone who knew your mother." Nicholas hesitated before opening the envelope. Inside was a note, written in elegant handwriting. "Nicholas, I was honored to know your mother. She believed in the power of her music to heal, to connect, and to tell the stories others were too afraid to share. Today you carry that legacy forward. With love, Veronica Sinclair." The name felt familiar, though Nicholas couldn't place it. Before he could ask, Daniel said, "She's here, a music producer, and she's interested in your performance." Nicholas's pulse quickened, a mix of excitement and anxiety coursing through him. The stakes, already high, had just been raised. The minutes before his performance felt both endless and fleeting. Backstage, Nicholas stared at the piano on stage through a gap in the curtain, its glossy surface gleaming under the stage lights. He closed his eyes, letting the melody of his mother's song guide his thoughts. In his mind's eye, he could see her, her hands moving gracefully across the keys, her voice filling the room with a sound so pure it seemed otherworldly. The memory brought a pang of sorrow, but also a flicker of hope. "This is for you, Mom," he thought, gripping the cassette in his pocket. "This is for everything you gave me." When his name was announced, the applause that erupted felt distant, muffled by the thundering of his heartbeat. He walked to the piano with measured steps, each one echoing like the beat of a drum. Sitting down, he took a deep breath and placed the cassette in the player beside him. "This song," he began, his voice steady despite the whirlwind inside him, "is my mother's. It's unfinished, but tonight I'll do my best to honor her and what she stood for." As the first note spilled from the piano, the world around him faded. The audience, the stage, even his own fears, all of it dissolved into the music. The melody, tender and haunting, wove itself through the air, carrying with it a story of love, loss, and resilience. Nicholas's voice joined the piano, his words a tapestry of emotion that drew the audience into his world. But as he reached the song's final refrain, a sudden interruption shattered the moment. The screen behind him flickered to life, revealing a grainy video. The audience gasped as the image of a young woman appeared, his mother. She sat at a piano, her fingers poised above the keys, her voice trembling as she sang the very melody Nicholas had been performing. The shock was like a physical blow. Nicholas froze, his hands hovering above the keys. The video played on, his mother's voice filling the room with an aching beauty that brought tears to his eyes. But the song in the video was incomplete, her performance ending abruptly as she looked directly into the camera. "To my son," she said, her voice breaking, "this song is yours now, finish it." The screen went dark. The silence that followed was deafening. Nicholas turned to Eleanor, who looked as stunned as he felt. Daniel stood nearby, his jaw tight, and in the corner of his eye, Nicholas saw Veronica Sinclair rising from her seat. She stepped onto the stage, her heels clicking against the floor like the ticking of a clock. "Your mother," Veronica said, her voice resonating through the hall, "was extraordinary. But the truth is, her story wasn't just about her talent. It was about survival." The weight of her words pressed down on Nicholas. He turned toward Andre, his voice trembling. "What is she talking about?" Andre stepped forward, his face pale. "Nicholas, I never told you the full story. Your mother, she recorded that video as a warning. My choices put her in danger, and she went into hiding to protect you." The truth hit Nicholas like a tidal wave, a flood of emotions threatening to drown him. But even in the chaos, he felt something shift, an unyielding determination rising within him. Turning back to the piano, he placed his hands on the keys once more. "This is for her," he said softly, his voice carrying the weight of every revelation. And then he began to play. This time, the melody transformed. It was no longer just his mother's song, it was his. His fingers danced across the keys with a fervor he hadn't known he possessed. His voice soaring with lyrics that spoke of redemption, of second chances, of finding light in the darkest of moments. The audience was spellbound, their silence a testament to the power of his performance. And as Nicholas played the final note, the weight of the past lifted leaving in its place a fragile but undeniable hope. The ovation that followed was thunderous, but Nicholas barely heard it. His heart was too full, his mind too consumed by the faces of those who mattered most. His mother, Eleanor, Andre. This wasn't just his story anymore, it was theirs. The thunderous applause still echoed in the hall, a testament to the power of Nicholas's performance, but his heart wasn't resting in the ovation. The faces in the crowd, the astonished expressions, the tear-streaked cheeks, blurred into the background. His focus was on the piano, the keys beneath his trembling fingers, and the lingering resonance of his mother's song in the air. The weight of her voice, of her presence through the video, hung like a delicate thread connecting him to her across time. For a moment, he couldn't move. The silence that followed the applause felt oppressive, charged with unanswered questions and emotions threatening to break free. His chest rose and fell rapidly, his hands clutching the edge of the piano bench as he turned toward Eleanor, her frail form trembling from the overwhelming performance. "She left that for me," Nicholas said, his voice cracking. It wasn't a question, it was a revelation, yet still tinged with disbelief. Eleanor nodded, her eyes glistening with tears. "Your mother always knew you'd find your way back to her music, Nicholas. She trusted you to carry it forward." Before Nicholas could respond, Veronica Sinclair stepped forward, her presence commanding yet tender, as if she knew the weight of the moment. The crowd had stilled, their eyes following her every movement as she approached Nicholas with measured grace. "Your mother, Isabel, was one of the most gifted and resilient artists I've ever known," Veronica began, her voice steady, yet filled with emotion. "But her story, your story, is more than just music. It's about survival, Nicholas. It's about love that endured through sacrifice." Nicholas swallowed hard, his gaze snapping to Andre, who had remained in the shadows near the edge of the stage. The words Veronica spoke landed like heavy stones in his chest, making it harder to breathe. "What did you do, Dad?" Nicholas asked, his voice sharp, cutting through the air like a blade. His use of the word dad surprised even himself. It wasn't laced with affection, but carried years of unresolved pain. Andre stepped forward, each step hesitant, as if the weight of his choices dragged at his heels. His face was pale, his eyes filled with shame. "Nicholas," he began, his voice shaking, "I thought leaving would protect you and your mother, but I see now how wrong I was." "What do you mean?" Nicholas demanded, standing now, the tremor in his voice betraying the storm of emotions inside him. "Protect us from what? From who?" Andre took a deep breath, the room hanging on his every word. "Years ago, I got involved with people I shouldn't have. People who saw your mother's talent not as art, but as a tool. They wanted her music for their gain, their control. When I realized how dangerous they were, it was too late. I left to shield you both, but when I realized how dangerous it was, the more it ripped it apart, made me hurt you. But I was protective of you before that, and did anything I could to protect you from something ruined like that." The confession hit Nicholas like a tidal wave. He stumbled back, his hand gripping the piano for support. His entire life, he had painted his father as a ghostly figure of abandonment. To hear now that his absence had been driven by love, even if misguided, left him reeling. "Do you have any idea what that did to us?" Nicholas's voice cracked, his pain spilling out. "To her, to me, I grew up wondering why I wasn't enough for you to stay." Andre's face crumpled and he fell to his knees as if the weight of Nicholas's words had physically struck him. "I know," Andre whispered, his voice breaking. and I've lived with that guilt every day. But I'm here now, Nicholas. I'm here to try and make it right." The hall was silent, the audience seemingly holding their collective breath. Eleanor, sitting in the front row, leaned forward as if willing her grandson to hear the unspoken truth beneath Andre's words. Nicholas turned back to the piano, his mind racing. His hands hovered over the keys as memories flooded him. His mother's lullabies, the faint traces of her humming as she cooked dinner, the way her eyes lit up when she spoke of music. "You left us," Nicholas said finally, his voice quieter now, his anger giving way to sorrow. But she didn't. She stayed, even when it cost her everything. And now I'm supposed to carry all of this, her song, her story, her dreams? Veronica stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Nicholas," she said, her voice soft but firm, "your mother didn't leave you a burden. She left you a gift. Her music is her love, her hope, her way of giving you the strength to move forward." Nicholas closed his eyes, tears slipping down his cheeks as he let her words sink in. Slowly, he sat back down at the piano. The crowd remained utterly silent, the tension in the air palpable. "I don't know if I'm ready," Nicholas admitted, his voice trembling. "But if this song was meant for me, then I have to try." Eleanor's voice rang out, steady despite the tears in her eyes. "You've already made her proud, Nicholas. Now, make yourself proud." The room felt electric as Nicholas placed his hands on the keys once more. He closed his eyes, summoning every memory, every feeling, every fragment of his mother's unfinished melody. And then he began to play. The notes that flowed from the piano were raw, unpolished, but achingly beautiful. Nicholas poured every ounce of himself into the song. His pain, his love, his longing. His voice rose above the music, carrying lyrics that spoke of redemption, of finding one's way back to the light, of a family piecing itself together after years of fractures. As the final note faded into the air, the silence that followed was not empty. It was filled with something deeper, understanding, healing, and the promise of hope. The audience erupted into applause, rising to their feet in a thunderous ovation, but Nicholas barely heard it. His gaze was fixed on Andre, who stood at the edge of the stage, tears streaming down his face. Slowly, Andre stepped forward. He extended a hand, trembling with hesitation, as if afraid Nicholas would push it away. Instead, Nicholas stood, closing the distance between them. For a long moment, father and son simply looked at each other, the weight of years unspoken hanging in the air. And then Nicholas embraced him. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. As the audience continued to cheer, Veronica approached again, holding a flash drive in her hand. "This," she said, her voice quivering, "is your mother's full album. It's yours now." Nicholas accepted it, his fingers closing around the drive as if it were a lifeline. He turned to Eleanor, who smiled through her tears, and then to Andre, whose shoulders shook with quiet sobs. "This isn't just my story," Nicholas said, his voice carrying across the hall. "It's hers. It's ours. And it's not finished yet." The audience roared their approval, but for Nicholas, the true triumph was in the faces of those he loved, the family that, actually, reinforced his mentality, the family that, though fractured, was beginning to heal. And as he stepped off the stage, his heart felt lighter than it had in years. His mother's legacy wasn't a burden, it was a gift, and for the first time, he was ready to carry it forward. The applause eventually faded, but its echo lingered in Nicholas's chest like the soft hum of a tuning fork. He stepped off the stage, the weight of the performance slowly giving way to the surreal lightness of the moment. The flash drive with his mother's recordings sat heavy in his pocket, yet it felt less like a burden and more like a compass. a guide for the journey ahead. As he walked toward Eleanor, his steps faltered. The enormity of what had just transpired crashed over him in waves. The truth about his father, the revelation of his mother's story, and the song he had poured his heart into, it was all too much. He lowered himself into a chair next to Eleanor, his hands trembling slightly as he took hers in his. "You did it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but the pride in her tone was unmissable. Her frail fingers curled around his, grounding him. "She would be so proud, Nicholas, so proud." Nicholas's throat tightened, but he managed a nod. "I didn't do it alone, Gran," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "You, Jack, everyone, even him." His eyes flickered toward Andre, who stood a few feet away, hesitant, as if unsure whether to approach or retreat. Eleanor squeezed his hand. "Your father has carried his own pain, Nicholas. It doesn't erase the hurt he caused, but it's not too late to mend what's broken." Nicholas swallowed hard, the words settling into his heart like seeds waiting to take root. He turned to Andre, who met his gaze with eyes that reflected years of regret. The three of them, Nicholas, Eleanor, and Andre, sat together in the green room after the performance. The silence was thick but not unbearable. It was the silence of contemplation, of shared understanding, like the pause between the final note of a song and the applause that follows. Andre broke the quiet, his voice hesitant. "I never thought I'd get to see this day," he admitted, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "To see you standing up there, carrying her music. Nicholas, I've failed you in so many ways. I don't know if you'll ever forgive me, but I want you to know leaving you was the hardest thing I've ever done." Nicholas stared at him, his emotions swirling like a storm. Forgiveness felt like a distant shore, but he could feel the current pulling him toward it. He thought of his mother's unfinished melody, the way her voice had filled the hall earlier, as if urging them to find their way back to one another. "I don't know if I can forgive you," Nicholas said honestly, his voice quiet but steady. "But I think I want to try." The words hung in the air, fragile but powerful, like the first ray of sunlight breaking through a stormy sky. Andre's shoulders sagged with relief, and Eleanor reached out to place a hand on his arm, her smile faint but encouraging. "Trying is a start," she said softly, "and sometimes that's all we need." The following days were a whirlwind. Veronica's offer to help release Isabel's full album set the wheels in motion, and Nicholas found himself immersed in the process. He pored over the recordings, each song a piece of his mother's soul, her dreams, her story. It was like rediscovering her, not as a distant memory, but as a living presence. One evening, as he sat at the piano in the lounge, Roberta approached him with a cup of coffee and a knowing smile. "You've been at this for hours," she said, setting the mug down beside him. "Don't forget to breathe, Nicholas." He chuckled softly, running a hand through his hair. "It's just, every time I hear her voice, it's like she's right here, you know? Like she's still guiding me." Roberta nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Maybe she is." Music has a way of keeping people alive in our hearts. And from what I've seen, you're not just carrying her legacy, you're making it your own. Her words struck a chord, and Nicholas realized how true they were. This wasn't just about his mother anymore. It was about healing, about bringing together the fractured pieces of his family and finding hope in the ruins. The night of the album's release was intimate but deeply emotional. The lounge was transformed into a warm, glowing haven, with candles flickering on every table and photos of Isabel adorning the walls. Her presence was everywhere, in the music that played softly in the background, in the smiles of those she had left behind. Nicholas took the stage once more, this time not to perform but to speak, The crowd, friends, family, and strangers drawn by the allure of Isabel's story, watched him with rapt attention. "My mother's music," he began, his voice steady but laced with emotion, "was more than just notes on a page. It was her heart, her dreams, her way of connecting with the world. Tonight, we honor her, not as someone we lost, but as someone who continues to inspire us." He looked out at the audience, his gaze landing on Eleanor, who gave him an encouraging nod, and Andre, whose expression was a mix of pride and sorrow. This album isn't just hers anymore, it's ours. It's a testament to love, to resilience, to the power of music to heal. As the first track from the album played, a hush fell over the room. Isabel's voice filled the air, rich and hauntingly beautiful, as if she were there among them. Nicholas closed his eyes, letting the music wash over him. For the first time in years, he felt not loss, but peace. Later that night, as the last guests trickled out of the lounge, Nicholas sat with Eleanor and Andre at a table near the stage. The candles flickered softly, casting warm light over their faces. "You've done something incredible, Nicholas," Eleanor said, her voice filled with pride. "You've given her the legacy she always deserved." Nicholas smiled, though his eyes were damp with tears. "I couldn't have done it without you. Either of you." Andre reached across the table, his hand tentative as it rested on Nicholas's. "Thank you for giving me a chance to be here," he said. "I know I have a long way to go, but I want to be the father you deserve." Nicholas nodded, his heart heavy but hopeful. "We'll figure it out. Together." As the three of them sat in comfortable silence, Nicholas felt a strange but welcome sense of closure. The pain of the past hadn't disappeared, but it no longer defined him. It had become part of his story. A story of forgiveness, of love, of finding light in the darkest moments. In his pocket, the flash drive containing his mother's album felt warm, almost alive. He smiled softly, looking up at the stars through the lounge's window. "Thank you, Mom," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "We're going to be okay." The following morning, sunlight streamed through the apartment windows, casting golden streaks across the living room where Nicholas sat, the flash drive in his hands. Its weight seemed lighter now, no longer a burden but a symbol, a key to unlocking a future where his mother's music could live on, not as a ghost of the past, but as a vibrant legacy. Eleanor watched him from her chair by the window, her eyes warm with quiet pride. She had aged visibly over the last few months, her battle with illness taking its toll, but her spirit was unyielding. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice steady, though tinged with a soft urgency. Nicholas nodded. "It's time." The days that followed were a whirlwind of collaboration. Veronica worked tirelessly with Nicholas to finalize the release of Isabel's album, guiding him through the labyrinth of contracts, recordings, and promotions. Her passion for the project was palpable, and Nicholas realized how deeply his mother had touched those who knew her. One afternoon, as Nicholas and Veronica reviewed the album's tracklist in the studio, she paused, her fingers tracing the edge of a photograph of Isabel. "You know," Veronica began, her voice wistful, "your mother once told me that music isn't just something we create, it's something we leave behind. It's a bridge between who we are and who we hoped to become." Nicholas leaned back in his chair, letting the words settle over him. She always found a way to make music about more than just herself. It was her way of connecting, her way of healing. Veronica smiled. "And now, it's yours." The album's release was scheduled for a month later, and the anticipation was electric. The lounge transformed once again, this time into a space of celebration. Candles lined the tables, their flickering flames casting dancing shadows on the walls adorned with photos of Isabel. The atmosphere was intimate but vibrant, the air alive with the hum of anticipation. As the lights dimmed and the first track from the album played, silence swept over the room. Isabel's voice filled the space, rich and hauntingly beautiful, carrying the weight of her story and the light of her dreams. Each note felt like a thread, weaving the crowd together in shared emotion. Nicholas closed his eyes, letting the music wash over him. It wasn't just a performance. It was a moment of communion, a testament to the power of connection. As the final song faded, Nicholas stepped onto the stage. The room erupted into applause, but it wasn't the thunderous ovation that moved him. It was the tears, the smiles, the way people held their hands to their hearts as if they had found something they'd lost. "Thank you," Nicholas began, his voice steady despite the swell of emotion in his chest. "This album isn't just my mother's story. It's our story. It's about love, sacrifice, and the ways we find each other even when life pulls us apart." He glanced at Eleanor, whose face glowed with pride, and then at Andre, who stood near the back, his eyes shimmering with unspoken words. "My mother taught me that music isn't just sound," Nicholas continued. "It's memory, it's hope, it's a way of saying I'm here and I won't be forgotten." Tonight, her music lives, and through it, so does she. In the days that followed, the album's release sparked conversations far beyond the lounge. Isabel's music resonated with listeners, her story touching hearts across the city and beyond. Nicholas found himself fielding interviews, invitations, and opportunities he never could have imagined. But through it all, he remained grounded, his focus unwavering, honoring his mother's legacy while forging his own. One evening, as Nicholas played the piano in the lounge, Andre approached hesitantly, holding 2 cups of coffee. The awkwardness between them had softened over the past weeks, replaced by a tentative understanding. "You were incredible tonight," Andre said, setting one of the cups on the piano. Nicholas looked up, his fingers pausing on the keys. "Thanks," he replied, the words simple but meaningful. They sat in silence for a moment, the quiet filled with the faint hum of conversation from the patrons nearby. Finally, Andre spoke, his voice heavy with emotion. "I never told you how much I loved your mother," he began. "She was my light in every dark place. And when I left, I thought I was protecting that light, but all I did was extinguish it." Nicholas studied him, the pain in Andre's voice mirroring the ache in his own heart. "You didn't extinguish it," he said quietly. "She kept it alive, and now, so will I." Andre's face crumpled, and Nicholas saw in his father's expression the same vulnerability he had felt on stage, the fear of falling short, of failing to heal wounds that ran too deep. But Nicholas also saw hope, fragile but undeniable. "I'm trying, Nicholas," Andre said, his voice breaking. "I don't know if I'll ever be the father you deserve, but I want to be here for you now, if you'll let me." Nicholas took a deep breath, his gaze fixed on the piano keys. He thought of his mother's song, of the way its melody had carried him through grief and into understanding. "It's not going to be easy," Nicholas said finally, "but I think we can figure it out." Andre nodded, his shoulders sagging with relief. "I'd like that." The weeks turned into months, and the pieces of Nicholas's life began to settle into place. The lounge became a second home, a place where music and memories intertwined. Eleanor, though frailer with each passing day, remained his constant source of strength. her presence a reminder of the love that had carried him through. One evening, as the stars twinkled above the city, Nicholas sat by Eleanor's side on the balcony of their apartment. She gazed at the sky, her expression serene. "Do you think she's proud of us?" Nicholas asked, his voice soft. Eleanor smiled, her hand resting gently on his. "Oh, Nicholas, she's more than proud. She's with you, in every note you play, in every choice you make. Her love is your melody now." Nicholas looked out at the horizon, the city lights blending with the stars in a breathtaking mosaic. He felt the warmth of Eleanor's words, the truth in them settling into his heart like a steady rhythm. "Thank you, Mom," he whispered, his voice carried by the wind, "for everything." And as the night stretched on, Nicholas felt not just the weight of his mother's legacy, but the joy of knowing it was a part of him. Alive, vibrant, and ready to be shared with the world. The music would never stop, and neither would the love that had created it. If you find this content interesting, please give me a like so I know and feel motivated to create more quality videos.